morning, everyone. My name is Phil Robinson, and I'm the state representative in House District 19, which covers the southeastern part of Cuyahoga County from Solon all the way over to Brecksville and Seven Hills. I want to first thank Ranking Member Bryce Sweeney for really outlining what's happening, her leadership on the Finance Committee as our Ranking Member, and also County Executive Renee for all your leadership as well. For far too long, the state has long neglected to properly fund Ohio public schools. As many of you already know, not once, not twice, not three times, but four times, until recently, the state Supreme Court said the way that we were funding public schools was unconstitutional. This neglect led to higher property taxes, and schools had to do more with less, and also led to us having to end up having levies all across the county and across the state. Now, in the state constitution, for those who may not be familiar, there's very few things that are explicitly stated in there, but one of them is around our public schools. And to quote, thorough and efficient system of common schools is one of the state legislature's few explicit responsibilities spelled out in the Ohio Constitution. When I started in the state legislature back in 2019, there was effectively no public school formula, a funding formula in place. State amounts were frozen, districts were either capped or loosely guaranteed funding, and state aid for students was disconnected from the real cost of what it costs to educate a child. And the funding was heavily dependent on local property taxes. Now, Ohio's funding system has been broken, unfair, and unpredictable for decades. But in the 134th General Assembly, with a bipartisan group who led by Representative Briar Rose Sweeney and Representative Jamie Callender, we were able to finally get historic school funding formula passed in the state legislature. Before that, schools had to rely more on property taxes when the state pays less, and it resulted in communities having to pay more. And either you were caught in two different worlds. If you were a community who did well, then you found yourself being overtaxed. If you were a community who didn't have a lot of resources, you had underfunded and under-resourced schools. And just to really double down on that example, you had Solon, where my wife and I live with our two children. In 2018, we had a levy. Now, this is a school that's ranked in the top 3 in the state every single year. Yeah, we had to pass a levy, not only for operating, but other costs just to continue to provide that same level of education. And then you have the city of Cleveland schools, even after they had tremendous gains over the last decade, were having to find themselves having to now to go back to the ballot box in order to have another levy. That is not sustainable. So after we pass a fair school funding plan, a bipartisan needs-based formula that once it's fully funded, and what I mean by fully funded is our Democratic caucus wanted to go all in right there for the historic investment. The money's there. Unfortunately, the majority party said that we would do this every 2 years. So all this is a historic amount of investment we're putting in the schools. Every 2 years we have to fight for that, to have another down payment on something that we promise the residents of the state of Ohio. Increased state aid, individually designed for school district needs, made state aid more predictable so districts knew how to create their budgets. If you ever sat in a school district and talked with a superintendent prior to fair school funding plan, you were asked to make a 3 to 5 year plan for your budget, but you had no idea what was going to be in the budget. So essentially you were flying blind. Now you are able to, in a very succinct and deliberate way, plan and know exactly what it costs in order to fund your schools. I'm proud to be part of the group led by Representatives Briar Rose Sweeney and myself and others on the Finance Committee. We were able to secure $1.5 billion for schools over the next 2 years. And then we were also able to update the formula. Not to get too wonky, but in order to make sure you're truly paying for the cost of educating a child in the state of Ohio, you must use the most up-to-date inputs. And that was something that was key in this last funding budget that we get, operating budget that we were able to complete. The local share funding would have increased to an unprecedented 65% if we did not update that formula. So that would have been really a burden for the residents of the state of Ohio. This historic investment helped provide for the next several decades funding to combat what was unconstitutional funding before, and it allowed us to not rely solely on property taxes in order to be able to fund our schools. And lawmakers must continue to support fair school funding. So talk to your state representative, talk to your state senator in the Ohio General Assembly, because we need to continue to push to get the remaining money in order for the fair school funding to take effect for all of our schools. We put a down payment on it, now we need to make sure that we finish the job and support the majority party to make sure that that happens. And then the last part is the local government fund. And so many people don't think a lot about that. But when we think back to Governor Kasich back in 2011, they basically gutted the local government fund. And I'm sure County Executive Renee has talked to many mayors and many council presidents all over the county, in which that has really basically disinvested in our first responders, our police, our firefighters, making sure that the roads and streets we depend on have the funding that they need. And so what happens when we don't fund in that? What happens when you cut $1 billion in local government fund in Cuyahoga County? It means people have to rely again on going back to the ballot box, asking residents to pay higher taxes, increasing property taxes, and then going back to have levies again. And so Representative Juanita Brennan and I have introduced House Bill 573, which will restore local government funding back to the 2008 level, which will ensure $1 billion will go back to the communities and cities throughout the state of Ohio, which will therefore make sure that a resident doesn't have to choose between wanting support moving forward with our schools and our communities and being able to continue to keep up with their property taxes. And I'll just close with this. Maybe about 6 months ago, I went to Walton Hills for a town hall meeting with Daniel Turner Birch, who's a school board member on the Bedford City Schools, and we were talking there, and almost every resident in that room was someone who either retired or on the precipice of retiring. And they said, look, I've done all the right things, I played by the rules, I have everything set, and now you raise my property taxes. I don't know how I'm going to be able to keep up with that. You're making me choose between being able to pay my bills and being able to live somewhere, or whether or not I want to invest in the students in the schools that of course I want to support in my community, because that helps increase property values. This puts residents, especially our senior citizens, in a lose-lose situation, and this doesn't have to be. There's more that can be done. The state legislature needs to take action. The majority party needs to make sure we come back and get this solved. The money's there, and this should not trickle down to both our county government and our local and city elected officials. And with that, I'd like to call up Representative Sean Brennan, who's one of our freshman members who's advocating on behalf of seniors, and he'll talk to you a little bit more about some of this legislation that can help curb the situation. Thank you.